Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my father and what it was like to travel when I was young. My father was uneducated because he dropped out of high school. He said he dropped out because he was not going to write a term paper, and they got to that assignment, and so he quit. He spoke really correct English. He was well read. He was interested in history. He loved geography and maps and was a curious person. And he wanted us to be well read and aware and not just sitting around wasting our time. We spent a lot of time he would give out the states and we had to say the capitals. We did things like that because we didn't have television and a lot of technology, well, any technology at that time. And so one evening we were sitting out in the front yard after supper. There were no air conditioning in our houses at that time. Very few people had any air conditioning. And so after supper, you would sit out in the yard in the shade of the trees. We had company. My daddy's sister, whom he was very close to, her name was Haley, and her husband, my Uncle Guy, who was a very sweet and going along with the crowd type guy. We were all talking, and neither one of them had ever seen the ocean. And they got to talking about not seeing the ocean, and none of us kids had seen the ocean. This was in 1949 in August. My daddy had a new Buick, and it was black. And so they decided to rectify that situation, and we would go look at the ocean tomorrow. And so my father loved to take people and show them things and surprise people. And so my youngest sister, Mary, was only 2. So she and my mother stayed at home. And my older sister, Virginia, was in business college. And so she stayed at home. But my daddy, my Uncle Guy, and Aunt Haley, and I, and my brother Charles, and my sister Evelyn all got in the car the next morning and left for the beach. I was at that time 16. Evelyn was 14. Charles was 12. And we took a picnic lunch with us because at that time there were no fast food places, no McDonald's, no Hardee's, no Wendy's. Most people who traveled carried food with them. And there were no interstates. Along the highway, there would be places where you could just pull off and there would be one picnic table. And so people took food and you would just drive till you found a picnic table that was not being used, and you would stop and eat the food you brought with you. So that's what we did on our way. My daddy had figured out that because of the configuration of the shape of the United States, that the closest place to get to see the Atlantic Ocean was Charleston, South Carolina. And so that's where we headed. We left fairly early in the morning and we got to Charleston in the afternoon in time to go. We went to Folly Beach, which at that time, and still is, a public beach. And the highway you just drove up, and I remember that last little rise we went over, and all of a sudden there was the ocean. And it was very exciting. There was a large pavilion there. It had food for sale and had dressing rooms, and it was a very busy place with people swimming and a lot of activity. And so we all went swimming in the ocean that afternoon. And we were very excited. We got a hot dog for supper while we were there. And then we went to stay in a mom and pop motel, which was the kind of places that you stayed in at that time. All I really remember about that motel is that Charles and Evelyn and I stayed in a room by ourselves. There was no mini fridge or microwave, but there was a radio in a big piece of furniture. And it was later on you would see TVs that had a little bitty screen with a big piece of furniture, but this was a radio. And we accidentally discovered that if you jumped on the floor in a certain place, it changed the station. And so my sister Evelyn and Charles spent a lot of time aggravating each other. One of them would find the station they wanted, and the other one would jump on the floor and change it. And so that was their entertainment that evening. We slept fine. The next morning, my daddy woke up earliest, and he went out hunting coffee. And while he was out hunting coffee, we didn't know this, but he just went ahead and ate breakfast. Then he came back to the motel. He got us all up, and he wanted to go into Charleston and find out when the ferry left to go out to Fort Sumter. He knew about Fort Sumter, where the first shot of the Civil War was fired, and he wanted us to see it and experience it. So my Aunt Haley spoke up, and she said, I have not had breakfast. And he said, okay, we'll go down to the port where the boat leaves, and we'll find out the schedule, and then we'll eat. So we went down, and everything was fine, except we found out that the boat was leaving in 10 minutes. And it seemed like that was the best thing to do. Otherwise, we were going to have to wait a long time. She said, I've not had breakfast. And he said, we will get something at Fort Sumter. So we got on the boat and we rode to Fort Sumter. Now, at Fort Sumter, it's a little island out in the water offshore of Charleston. And there are not many trees around that fort. It was hot, August day. There only were no trees. There were also no places to get food. There was not a vending machine. There was not even Cokes. There was nothing. So we did a tour of Fort Sumter. And then we got on the boat to come back to Charleston. And we got back to Charleston just about noon. And so there was a lovely park near the dock there. And so Daddy parked us all in the park, and he and Uncle Guy went to a little, like a drugstore place that had a lunch counter. And he got us all a sandwich. I do not remember what kind of sandwich, but it was just a sandwich. And we sat there in the park in the shade and ate our sandwich. And didn't get anything to drink. There was a water fountain there. It was terrible tasting water, I remember. But we were then refreshed, and Aunt Haley was not complaining about not having breakfast anymore. Then he decided there was a plantation just north of Charleston a little bit, that we'd go look at that. And we got there, and it was not open. And so we had already gone north a little bit from Charleston, so he decided we might as well just start on toward home. And as we came up the road, he said, we're going to get to Wadesboro, North Carolina, just about supper time. And Aunt Hannah, my mother's aunt, lived in Wadesboro. She lived alone. She was a widow. And he said, we'll go by her house, and if she's home, we won't stop. We'll go on into town and get supper and take it back to her house and have a little visit. So that's what we did. We got to Wadesboro. We drove by her house, and her car was there, and her windows were open, and her front door was open. She had a screen there. And so we went right on into town. Now, we did not get carry out. There was no such thing. We went to a grocery store where my daddy bought 2 chickens, 8 ears of corn, and a cantaloupe. And we went back to Aunt Hannah's to surprise her. And there was a surprise, but it was not her that was surprised. We were surprised because she was not at home. She was in New England on a bus tour, expected back the next evening, and her neighbors had come over to air out her house. so that it wouldn't be so hot being closed up for a while. She'd been gone for a week and would be musty smelling. And so they were airing out her house in anticipation of her coming back. So we have a little bit of a problem now. My daddy's answer to the problem was that Aunt Haley would go in there and cook the food we had bought in Aunt Hannah's house and then clean up the mess. And he said, Wilma will help you. And I knew nothing about cutting up a chicken. And Aunt Haley said, no, I don't know this lady. She's not related to me. And I'm not cooking in her house. And besides that, it's hot. And so we had another problem. And while we were discussing what to do, we really couldn't go to a motel with 2 chickens and 8 ears of corn and a cantaloupe. And so Uncle Guy said, my sister Margaret lives about 100 miles up the road in Hickory, North Carolina. I guess we could go there. Now, I knew that Uncle Guy had a sister named Margaret. I had never seen her. And all I knew was what I'd heard about her, that she left rural East Tennessee, married a highfalutin guy, and lived in the city in a brick house. And we didn't have brick houses. We had frame houses, and the brick house was kind of special. So we got back in the car, all 6 of us, and now we're going to surprise Margaret, and that we don't even know. And so we started up the road, and we got as far as Charlotte, and it was dark then. And Daddy was driving, but he loved maps, and I love maps. And I often sit around and just look at maps. And my husband, Mike, used to say, are you going somewhere? And I'd say, I don't know, but if I do, I want to know where I am. But anyway, he let me read the map. And when he turned in Charlotte, I convinced him he turned the wrong direction. And so he turned around. And we went about 15 miles back south before I got brave enough to tell him I'd made a mistake. And so that made us even later. So we arrived at Margaret's house about 9:30 in the evening with our 2 chickens. In the meantime, it was so hot, and they realized these chickens had been out of the refrigerator for about 4 hours. And so Uncle Guy held them out the window, hoping he could cool them off, that the air outside the car might be, because we were moving fast, might be cooler than inside the hot car. This is a black car in 90 degrees in the south. And so we arrive at Margaret's house. She has no idea we're anywhere in the state. All 6 of us at 9:30 at night. We've not eaten anything all day but 1 sandwich. And we go in. It never occurred to her to ask if we'd had dinner. We gave her the chickens and the corn and the cantaloupe, and she said, oh, great, we'll have this for breakfast. And nobody said a word. And so we went to bed. I remember that Charles and Evelyn and I slept on the floor. I don't know where the other people slept, but I was embarrassed. I didn't know this woman. I thought she was well-to-do, and here we came in like 6 country bumpkins with our food that we had planned to have for supper. So we spent the night, and it was kind of an exciting night because in addition to messing with 6 people she didn't know were going to spend the night there with her and her family, and who brought this food that she had to put away, they were making wine. And one of the big vats that they were fermenting the grapes in, the yeast got too active and it blew out the cork out of the top, and they had a mess in the basement of fermented grapes that they had to clean up in addition to cooking chickens for us for breakfast. And so I was glad to get away from Margaret's house. She was lovely. but I knew that that's not what you're supposed to do. But then there were no cell phones. You couldn't call somebody and tell them you were coming. And we survived. I have been back to Folly Beach many times and always had fun, but never was a trip as memorable as that one that we made 76 years ago.